this is end of day stuff. There is no other place for Palestinians who have been displaced in Gaza to go. This is the final town. This is it. We've had at least a week of talking up the possibility of Rafah being attacked as the next stage of the invasion. If you think about back to November, back to October, when the Israelis were initially trying to sort of clear northern Gaza, they have cleared now all the way down through to Khan Yunis, which is a southern city, and now they have reached basically the outskirts of Rafah, and now they're signaling that they want to press ahead and launch an offensive there. They say that there are a remaining 4 battalions of Hamas fighters there. That's Benjamin Netanyahu's claim. And it seems that they are intent on pursuing this. They've also been increasing the airstrikes on this, what is essentially a vast refugee camp, a huge tent city that has far outgrown what was originally, a border town,
Well,
not
exactly.
one of Gaza's.
And on that point, we'll be hearing from the Norwegian Refugee Council in just a moment. But where are these 1.5 million people who are currently thought to be in Rafah? And they've gone there because they've fled other parts of Gaza. Where can they go?
It's a very good question, and this is what the US has been telling Benjamin Netanyahu. We had this Anthony Blinken, the US Secretary of State, come to Israel earlier this week, and Joe Biden, with probably his most explicit criticism of Israel today, said yesterday that Israel had gone too far in its war on Gaza, and they have been ramping up the pressure on Israel to sort of scale down the offensive and certainly not go into Gaza, which would be, if anything, expanding the war. But that doesn't seem to be the direction that Israel is taking. And I think Netanyahu's statement today, saying that he was ordering the military to carry out an evacuation, was his way of trying to assuage US concerns. Whether that he will succeed in that, it remains to be seen.
Well, a State Department spokesman said yesterday that going ahead with the offensive now, quote, with no planning and little thought in an area where there is sheltering of 1 million people would be a disaster. I mean, remarkably outspoken by the US, but the suggestion is that Netanyahu really is not taking any notice.
It's a pretty decisive comment, isn't it? But what Netanyahu's response today, he is specifically saying, taking up this phrase planning and saying, oh, we are planning. I am planning for a military offensive and I'm planning for an evacuation. So that's him trying to sort of answer those US questions. I would be very surprised if the US would feel comforted by those. This is a war that is now 4 months in, shows no signs of ending, despite, there was some brief hope of ceasefire negotiations, but those have floundered in recent days. Netanyahu has outright rejected Hamas's initial demands, and poured scorn really on the whole peace process. So far from the sort of hostage exchanges that some people were sort of getting their hopes up about, the war seems to be continuing apace.
And just finally, your sense of the timing and the scale of this offensive now?
It is, this is end of day stuff. There is no other place for Palestinians who have been displaced in Gaza to go. This is the final town. This is it. How Israel can evacuate it and carry out an offensive without huge civilian casualties is very hard to see.
George Grylls, the Times' defence correspondent in Jerusalem, thank you very much for joining us. Let's turn now to Shayna Lowe, who's from the Norwegian Refugee Council, also in Jerusalem. Shayna, good afternoon to you.
Hi, good afternoon.
And you just heard there from George Grylls his thoughts on the number of people in Rafah and what the consequences might be of this renewed offensive. What are your thoughts?
By and large, I agree with George. What we're hearing from our teams on the ground is that there simply is no space for Palestinians to go from. Our colleagues are telling us that they're basically trapped between Israeli tanks and the Egyptian borders. There aren't any spaces left in Rafah to accommodate displaced people. And the north of Gaza, which has already seen intensive fighting and destruction, is really not suitable to displace 1.5 million people many of whom have been displaced multiple times over and over again over the last 4 months.
So, I mean, really, the other large parts of the rest of Gaza are sort of destroyed to rubble, aren't they?
Uh, Huge portions of Gaza are destroyed. As much as 80% of housing units in Gaza are damaged or destroyed. Critical infrastructure is damaged and destroyed. The shelter cluster, which the Norwegian Refugee Council hosts, estimates that it will take at least 3 years just to clear the rubble from Gaza at this point. And so to imagine sending a bunch of people who have literally no belongings or very little belongings back up to the north, where there's nothing there to await them, would be a catastrophe. On top of that, all aid is currently entering Gaza through the south. And so that raises a whole other issue: is how will Palestinians in Gaza be able to get the essential needs met when aid isn't able to reach the north now, when there are limited people there, let alone if there were 1.5 million more displaced people in northern Gaza.
We've been hearing for weeks from humanitarian agencies such as yourself on the spread of disease and the terrible situation of people still in Gaza. What would be the impact in humanitarian terms if this offensive now goes ahead?
We're already seeing widespread reports of disease in the sites that we are supporting. We've had reports of hepatitis A, intestinal flu, gastroenteritis, diarrhea, all things that you would imagine from people living in unsanitary, unhygienic, and very close quarters. And so to imagine people moving back up to the north or elsewhere where there are no facilities, it's going to compound the catastrophe that's already taking place in Gaza, to a level that we simply haven't seen, and really is I think at some point beyond our imagination, because what we're seeing already so far over these last 4 months is a humanitarian catastrophe that we have not been able to respond to effectively.
Given that Israel says that Rafah is the last remaining Hamas stronghold, therefore they're going to go ahead with this offensive, what would you call upon, Gaza's neighbours, Israel's neighbours to do now to help ease that humanitarian situation that you describe?
Well, I think the first thing that we need to do is continue to push for a ceasefire. There's been 4 months of destruction, death, devastation throughout Gaza, and we really need to be continuing to push for a ceasefire. This is a conflict that is not going to be resolved through military means and military might. And it really needs to be resolved diplomatically through negotiations. And so, first and foremost, that's the most important thing. Second of all, we need there to be an increase in aid that's getting into Gaza. We need people in Gaza to feel some relief and be able to start building their lives all over again. We simply cannot have this operation expand into the south where there are 1.5 million people seeking shelter.